A Canadian factory is making military vehicles bound for Ukraine, and the job has become deeply personal.
I must do this. If I hear and I must something help.
And a fresh wave of fear in Afghanistan.
Even at night, I cannot sleep very well because I'm thinking that someone will come and someone will kill me as well.
Former politicians and human rights activists say they are in more danger than ever. That's later, but first. The Mayor of Toronto is calling on the Ontario and federal governments to invest more in mental health and addiction treatments. John Tory made the appeal after a deadly and apparently random attack on an 89-year-old woman. It's just the latest in a series of random attacks in the city, including several on the transit system. As Philip Lee-Shannock reports, while there have been calls for increased policing, not everyone sees that as the only solution.
For someone who loves Toronto, it upsets me.
Norma Davis is a longtime downtown Toronto resident. She lives just around the corner from where a woman died after being thrown to the sidewalk. It's one of many recent incidents that have her feeling unsafe.
It's happening recently. Makes me a little more concerned. When I go in the subway, I stand back a little further.
Yeah, I stand with my back against the wall all the time.
Pedro Pfaff says recent incidents on Toronto Transit have him feeling unsafe. Police are investigating 2 apparently random violent murders and reports of people getting pushed onto the subway tracks, one attempt just yesterday. Also this week, an alleged hate-motivated attack. Police are looking for a suspect who knocked off a man's turban and insulted him. Pfaff says he seldom sees transit police.
So what you need is security to start from one end of the train and the other end of the train and then walk through the cars.
That's why in the budget I've allocated more resources, and it has to be approved by council.
Toronto Mayor John Tory has promised to hire 50 more transit enforcement officers
to make sure there can be more people in more places to create that sense of security. I'm saying I'm now thinking about mental health professionals, but also special constables who can, just by their presence, sometimes deter the kind of activity or prevent it or step in and apprehend a person right away.
Sheila Pizzi-Allen of the transit advocacy group TTC Riders says mental health issues should not be an afterthought.
What we'd like to see is an expansion of more supportive staff, crisis intervention workers who could support people. I think when people are on the transit system, they see someone in mental and emotional distress, they want that person to get support.
Transit police in Vancouver do have training in mental health de-escalation and connecting people with social services if they need them, while the Metro in Montreal pairs a transit officer with a frontline outreach worker. Sandy Simpson is chief of forensic psychiatry at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. He says that street drugs like cocaine, ketamine, and methamphetamines may have played a role in some incidents.
Disturbed behavior that is seen may well be intoxication, or it may be acute episodes of mental illness, and they can be hard to differentiate.
And like dealing with someone in mental distress, officers may not have the training beyond what's needed to enforce the law. Philip Lee-Shannock, CBC News, Toronto.
In Alberta, Premier Danielle Smith says she's called for an independent review into possible emails exchanged between her office and Crown prosecutors about cases related to last year's Coutts border blockage. CBC News has previously reported a staffer in Premier Smith's office emailed the Alberta Crown Prosecution Service critiquing the charges, which has raised questions about political interference in the justice system. Smith discussed the investigation in her weekly appearance on Chorus Entertainment's Your Province, Your Premier radio program.
So I have asked for our independent public service to do a review of emails. I want to see if there has. I want to see what they find out.
How in depth is that going to be, Premier Smith?
We have an IT department that can look at all of the emails that have been received by Crown prosecutors and assess it against all of my staff.
Smith says the results of the review will be made public, but it will not be finished until after the weekend. Ottawa has agreed to a $2.8 billion settlement in a class action lawsuit brought by 325 First Nations seeking reparations for loss of language and culture by residential schools. The original claimants were the Gottfriedson Band, who attended residential schools as day scholars and were left out of the 2006 settlement. A federal court still has to approve the agreement before the money can be distributed, but Canada has agreed to deposit it into a trust fund that'll operate for 20 years and will be governed by a board of Indigenous directors. Next, to the war in Ukraine, where funerals have been held for some of the country's top security officials. A tearful President Volodymyr Zelensky and his wife, Olena Zelenska, were among the hundreds who attended in Kyiv today. The funeral was for the Interior Minister and other top government and police personnel. They were among 14 people killed on Wednesday when their helicopter crashed just outside the capital. The funeral itself was nearly overshadowed by growing discord in the NATO alliance, as Germany resists sending more ground tanks to the front lines over fears it could escalate the war and the Russian government response. One aspect of Russia's war effort is in the spotlight: its use of a mercenary force known as the Wagner Group. As Chris Reyes reports, the U.S. has now put that group on a blacklist.
The Department of Treasury will be designating Wagner as a significant transnational criminal organization.
And more sanctions are coming next week. National Security spokesperson John Kirby made the announcement on Friday. Earlier this month, the founder of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, was shaking hands with Russian volunteer fighters coming back from Ukraine. He said, "You fulfilled your contracts, and you fulfilled them with honor and dignity." The private Russian military contractor has been instrumental in the war in Ukraine. Kirby said some 50,000 Wagner Group fighters are on the battlefield, many of them convicts.
It will broaden the network of nations and institutions that will be able to stop doing business with Wagner.
In a message on the app Telegram, Prigozhin asked what crime his company committed, addressing it to the White House and Kirby. Danny Bello is a professor of international relations at Webster University in St. Louis, Missouri. He says the sanctions are a way for the U.S. government to punish not just Russia, but those helping in their war efforts. Prigozhin has been called Putin's chef because of his influential role in the Kremlin. The Wagner Group seen as a proxy military for the Russian Ministry of Defense.
In order to avoid any sort of gray areas in terms of sanctions that are imposed on the Russian state, there had to be a separate set of sanctions imposed on the Wagner Group. And again, the purpose is to cut the Wagner Group from any financial resources.
Along with the announcement, Kirby released newly declassified photos of Russian rail cars traveling from Russia to North Korea and back. The U.S. believes this was a delivery of weapons to be used by Wagner Group fighters.
Now, while we assess that the amount of material delivered to Wagner has not changed battlefield dynamics in Ukraine, we do expect that it will continue to receive North Korean weapon systems. We obviously condemn North Korea's actions, and we urge North Korea to cease these deliveries to Wagner immediately.
Canada has also condemned the Wagner Group in recent months. Foreign Minister Melanie Joly said the transaction of weapons from North Korea by Wagner clearly violates international law and United Nations Security Council resolutions. Chris Reyes, CBC News, New York.
The Canadian government has announced it'll spend $90 million to purchase 200 armoured vehicles for Ukraine. The vehicles are all being made right here in Canada, with some help from those most affected by the war. Marina von Stackelberg has that story.
Blowtorches run 24/7 inside a Mississauga, Ontario factory. It's where armoured vehicles are being manufactured for Ukrainian soldiers to ride in. And building them are 80 Ukrainians who fled the Russian invasion, including this welder.
I must do this. If I hear and I must something help.
This job is personal. His parents are back home in Ukraine.
I call every day.
Rochelle, the company that builds these armored vehicles, has promised to deliver all 200 of Canada's order by the summer. CEO Roman Shimonov says the Ukrainian workers they've hired have the industrial labor skills to make it happen.
They don't like to be called as refugees. They asked us to call them temporary relocated people. They came here for the time until they can come back to Ukraine.
The vehicles, normally made for use in North America, have been modified for war.
Now our vehicles can withstand a better capacity for the threat of landmines and hand grenades.
Those designs altered thanks to feedback from Ukrainian soldiers on the front line, who this week ran drills to test new tactical vehicles donated by the West. In the last year, Canada has provided more than $1 billion in military aid to Ukraine, And this week, the federal defense minister met with allies to hear directly from Ukrainian officials about their long-term military plans and what support they need.
We understand at the beginning of the conflict, of the war, that everything was quite chaotic, right? Everyone wanted to equip the Ukraine. It was a panic.
Kristen Cian-Forani is president of the Canadian Association of Defense and Security Industries. She says Canadian companies are ready to produce more desperately needed military supplies. But as the war has dragged on, she says the federal government hasn't planned for the long term and has been slow to place orders.
Government is our customer. So industry needs to know, what to buy, how much to buy, when to buy it, so that we can organize ourselves and make those kinds of commitments, right? These are long-term projects.
So Ottawa has had to purchase military equipment for Ukraine from the United States that could have been built on Canadian soil, like ammunition, which factories in Quebec could produce. In Mississauga, Rochelle has doubled its manufacturing capacity in the last year. And this welder says he's grateful. His job is also an opportunity to help his country.
Thank you very much. Very, very much.
Marina von Stackelberg, CBC News, Ottawa.
Even at night, I cannot sleep very well because I'm thinking that someone will come and someone will kill me as well. All the world knows that what is going on in Afghanistan, particularly with the women of Afghanistan who are in the tough situation of their life. They are erased from everything, including their basic rights. I kindly request the Canadian government and people to stand beside the women of Afghanistan in this important time.
That's Gulali Mohammadi. She's a former Afghan MP and was speaking to CBC Radio's The House about the danger she faces as a female politician in Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. Mohammadi is still in Afghanistan, living in hiding. Her fears for her life took on new urgency after the assassination of her colleague, Mursal Nabizada, who was shot dead last week alongside her bodyguard. Freelance reporter Abdul Sattar has more from Islamabad.
The amount of fear is so profound that a number of Afghan with ties to the former government would only speak to CBC anonymously, like this doctor who knew Mursal Nabizada well.
The life of human rights activists, women rights activists, the life of Afghan political leadership is dangerous. They have a lot of fear. Most of them cannot go outside.
My name is Shakiba Nazari.
Afghan human rights activist Shakiba Nazari fled to France 4 months ago. She says Nabizada stayed in Afghanistan despite the security threats.
Taliban target Afghan women from the beginning. They created many limitations in terms of hijab, education, job. Nowadays, they are killing the ladies.
Women's rights activists who have stayed in Kabul say that the Taliban use specific tactics to target prominent women. According to this woman, we are calling Asmat.
Nabizada used to have security guards. The Taliban asked her to reduce her guards so they could target her.
She fears for the security of all those who have worked for democracy and human rights.
The way Mursal was killed now, all the women who worked for parliament, democracy, could also be killed. Their lives are in danger.
I have worked as a governor in Wardag, Logar, Khost and Paktia province.
Muhammad Halim Fidai believes that it is not only women who are under threat.
The educated class, the Afghan youth, former government officials, politicians, parliamentarians, civil society activists, journalists, and all those who has worked for the Republic and those who think differently from Taliban are posed to danger by the Taliban.
Canadian Senator Salma Ataullah Jan says the danger to members of the former government and those critical of the Taliban is imminent.
It's anyone, I think, who's outspoken, who's critical, and who has held positions of power. I think those are the people who I'm convinced they want to get rid of them. They don't want any dissenting voices in that society, and they want to put fear into people. That's one way to silence them, right?
Senator Ataullah Jan says the loss of strong female leaders like Mursal Nabizada will have long-term repercussions for the women of Afghanistan.
You know, my big concern is that if they're killing all the leadership, especially the female leadership, what role models are they going to be left for young women in Afghanistan? Who are they going to look up to? I think of the young lives that we lost, the young Canadians who died there defending the rights of these women and defending the rights of people of Afghanistan.
Abdul Sattar for CBC News, Islamabad.
Machu Picchu has closed indefinitely as protests against Peru's president intensify. The 15th century citadel in the Andes is a tourist magnet, and hundreds of people are now thought to be stranded nearby. The deadly protests began when the previous president was impeached and imprisoned. And as freelance reporter Jacob Kessler tells us, thousands were back on the streets today.
Political unrest in Peru shows no signs of fading. Protests in Lima have swelled as thousands of aggrieved protesters from all over the country have brought their fight to the Andean nation's capital. It's been more than 1 month since the ouster of Pedro Castillo, and since then, demonstrations have erupted around the country. Protest demands remain the same: the resignation of the current president, Dina Boluarte, the advance of earlier elections, and a new constitution. Most of those who have arrived in Lima are indigenous and poor Peruvians. They are often coming from regions of the country that have witnessed the most violence over the last month and plan on staying in the capital until their demands are met.
¿Cómo te llamas? Bueno, mi nombre es Donovan Luque García, soy estudiante de la Universidad Nacional.
Donovan Luque Garcia is a student from Puno, the region where, just 2 weeks ago, 18 people were killed in a single day during clashes with police. We are so angry, which is why we are here today in Lima, so that the usurper will listen to us. We want her to resign already because she doesn't represent us. A different young protester I spoke with held a sign which reads, "Lima, the rest of the country also exists. While you live alienated from us, the rest of your colonies are bleeding." During the protests yesterday, at least 58 people were injured and 1 was killed. And according to government officials, at least 2 police stations were attacked, with 1 station being set on fire. Police have used armored vehicles to break open the gates to San Marcos University, one of the most prestigious universities in Peru. Student activists have been housing protesters, and police claim to have entered in order to evict them. Most journalists and lawyers are not being granted access to the campus to monitor the unfolding situation. Jacob Kessler for CBC News, Lima, Peru.
The most trafficked animal in the world is the pangolin. The docile animal is prized across Asia for its meat and its scales, which are used in traditional medicine. The demand is so high that illegal poaching is driving the pangolin to extinction. Freelance reporter Peter Hatfield visited an anti-poaching patrol in the jungles of Vietnam and brings us this report.
I'm in the central highlands of Vietnam, and this jungle goes all the way to the border of Laos, which is about 30 kilometers away. I'm with an anti-poaching patrol because this is an area rife with poachers and traffickers who smuggle animals down to the ports of Vietnam and then out to other countries, mostly China. But there are signs that attitudes may be changing in Vietnam.
My name is Thái Nguyen. I am founder and director of Save Vietnam Wildlife. So threats for the wildlife in Vietnam is the main thing is wildlife consumption. People are very poor and they have to go to forest and hunt and animal for sometimes for food consumption at small scale, but it's more to sell to make the money to support for the family.
The most trafficked animal in Vietnam, and in fact the most trafficked mammal in the world, is the docile pangolin. Nearly 3 million are killed globally every year, mostly for their scales used in traditional Chinese medicine and their meat, which is considered a delicacy. When the anti-poaching patrols find animals caught in snares, they're brought here to the Animal Rescue Centre at Kuk Foong.
So my name is Chung. I'm a captive coordinator. Last month, we rescued 5 pangolins from illegal wildlife trade.
The Vietnamese government doesn't always welcome environmental activists like Nguyen Thi Can, who's currently serving a 2-year prison sentence after speaking out against coal-powered energy. But Thai's organisation, Save Vietnam's Wildlife, has had more success. Its anti-poaching patrols are allowed to operate inside national parks, and government schools welcome its educational teams to teach a new generation of Vietnamese about the value of their wildlife.
After nearly 20 years working in wildlife conservation, I feel very happy, and of course we see the problem is not stopped yet, but it's reduced a lot, especially like in Puman National Park where we are work, like over 90% of the trees been removed in the last 4 years. We see the increase of the wildlife population in the forest in Vietnam.
For CBC News, this is Peter Hadfield in Kuk Foong, Vietnam.
You're listening to The World This Weekend on CBC Radio. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. You can listen to this program anytime on the CBC Listen app or on the CBC News YouTube channel. If you're on social media, you probably know Rupi Kaur. She's the 30-year-old Canadian who's been dubbed the Queen of the Instagram Poets. Now, fresh off a world tour, she's speaking to CBC about her journey to global stardom that started in a suburb near Toronto.
I remember going to this open mic. It was in this community center in Malton. There was maybe 25 people in the audience, but something magical happened when I was up there. It felt like I was heard for the first time, and I was like, I love this feeling. And I realized that the stage is where I started to find my voice.
That's Rupi Kaur in conversation with CBC's Ian Hannamansing. It's the debut interview for a new series called It Changed Everything, and Ian joined us to talk about it. Ian, what can you tell us about this series and the meaning behind the title?
Well, I've interviewed a lot of people in a lot of different circumstances, you know, as you know, from getting clips for a news piece to live news specials to sit-down interviews. And despite all of that, this is different, and it's different in an exciting way. It's talking to a group of people who are at the top of their game, you know, the best in the world at what they do. And it's finding out, because I am fascinated by this, right? Like, what is it about what they did that got them to where they are now? What combination of talent, obviously, of luck, I think happens in every single story, but then also kind of determination or taking chances or all those other things that lead somebody to get to the top of their game.
Well, it sounds wonderful, and we've heard a bit of your chat with Rupi Kaur, so who else can we look forward to hearing?
Well, Alphonso Davies, the soccer star who got a lot of coverage, obviously, in the lead up to the World Cup. I learned stuff talking to him about his motivation. I mean, his family, his parents are so important to him. There he is, like a big soccer or football star in Munich, making millions of dollars a year. And he talked about, for example, how lonely it is for him, right? That he's there. A lot of his close friends don't live in Munich. Bilal Beg, the television star, the creative person behind the Canadian show now seen in the United States, sort of. And they, you know, have obviously blazed a very unique path, and it's taken a lot of courage for them to get to where they are. And again, Bilal very open about their stories.
So incredible stories for sure, but we're talking about, you know, an Insta poet versus the soccer field versus the world of entertainment. So these people are living very different lives, working in very different industries. Was there any common ground between them? Any similarities?
Three things I would say. First of all, obviously incredible talent. Secondly, humility, and so like it's just striking how humble they are. But the third thing is, even with that humility, like the single-minded purpose of trying to get fulfillment, you know, and look at Rupi Kaur, you know, who's on stages around the world doing a very unique show, and doing a book that she wrote, self-published as an undergrad, becomes a multi-million seller on the New York Times bestseller list. So this kind of single-minded purpose, but not the sort of, you know, Wall Street ambition that you see in movies of, like, you know, stepping on the shoulders of other people, but still being single-minded and trying to fulfill their abilities in a way that you know, is not off-putting. Let me put it that way.
Was there any moment or any revelation that surprised you?
I think just how candid people were. You know, it's very easy in these kinds of interviews to talk to a publicist or an agent and give a particular point of view and be super careful. And I never got that sense. You know, and so, for example, Brendan Fraser, just a few days ago, I asked him about not going to the Golden Globes and not winning at the Golden Globes. And he was quite open about both of those things, even when I learned later one of the publicists said to one of our producers, you know, is Ian moving on this? He spent a lot of time on this topic. I never got a sense from Brendan in the interview that I was pushing my luck with him at all.
That's incredible. Ian, you sound really excited about this series. We're really excited about it. Thank you so much for chatting with us.
Yeah, thank you very much.
The CBC's Ian Hannamansing, host of the new interview series, It Changed Everything. You can watch his conversation with Rupi Kaur tomorrow on The National or Monday on CBC Explore. Another week, another breakup banger. Last time it was Shakira tearing into her ex. Now it's Miley Cyrus tearing up the charts with her new tune, Flowers, which Spotify has declared the most streamed song in a single week. It's also sent the internet rumor mill spinning with theories it's all about her famous ex, actor Liam Hemsworth. I can buy myself flowers. Let's examine the pieces of evidence. Number 1, the song came out on Liam's birthday. 2, it references a house burning down, just like theirs did in 2018. 3, she wears a suit in the video that kind of looks like the suit he wore at their wedding. 4, it sounds similar to a Bruno Mars song that Liam may or may not have played to her once. I should have bought you flowers and held your hand. Okay, so some of these hunches might be out to lunches, but Miley's sister Brandy is doing her bit to keep him going on her podcast, Your Favorite Thing.
The song did come out on his birthday. Was that on purpose? I don't know, can't say. Genius, though, and it's just so fun to watch it all play out. Miley fans, I love ya.
Is any of it true?
I'm not here to say.
Oh, come on.
Speculation aside, the song definitely has some high-profile admirers, like Gloria Gaynor, who says it carries the torch of empowerment. It also sounds similar to Gaynor's I Will Survive, as proven in mashups like this one by Adam Music. We were good, we were gold, kind of dream. So is Flowers a new generation's I Will Survive? We'll let you be the judge. You've been listening to The World This Weekend. I'm Stephanie Skandaris. Good night.